Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf samech chet. We are on samech zayin amabet. Let me share my screen and we will get started. So, yesterday, or in fact, over the last 2 days, we saw that Rabbi Yoshua says that if a Kohen takes a bird ola, so again, they're all always brought in pairs, but in any event, a single bird ola, and you do everything to that bird ola, and you treat it just like a chatas. So then that animal is not subject to meila, and that's because when you have something that is eligible for the kohanim to eat or participate in or take or use, etc., and all of the bird is subject to that usage by the kohen after all of the blood is applied. So there's no meila because it no longer really belongs to God. Now you may be stealing from that Kohen, but you're not stealing from God in the same degree. So that's the reason that there would not be meila. Now Rav Ada bar Ahava explained that Rabbi Yoshua is saying that in fact the animal transforms into a chatas. And since a chatas is again completely given to a kohen after all its procedures, that's why it's not subject to meila. So that's the basic rule. And uh, and the idea is, and the reason for that, we mentioned this yesterday, is the fact that there are 2 points in time when a bird can be determined what it is. It can be determined what it is when it's set aside. One can say, the owner can say, this bird is an ola, this bird is a chatas, or it can happen, you don't have to set it aside as one of the two. And as the Kohen does the work on it, so then it will be the item that you say. So what effectively is happening here is although the person already said that it should be an Ola, when the Kohen sort of does his actions that are all consistent with a Chatas, so that's how it becomes a Chatas. Because again, the actions of the Kohen have that ability in general. And so as a result, in this particular case, we're going to enable that to happen. And so, on the other hand, we saw yesterday that in the reverse, it doesn't work because when you take a chatas and now you try to make it into an ola, the problem is that the initial steps that you're doing are the exact same steps that would be true for a chatas. So having set it aside as a chatas and now doing the very initial steps of the milika and the location of the malika are all consistent with it being a chatas. Unlike if you take an ola and you do it as a chatas. If you take a chatas and you do it as an ola, it's all consistent with the original chatas intention that you had. And so as a result, when you eventually do something that is inconsistent with the chatas, now it's a chatas that is not kosher. On the other hand, when you had that ola that you're doing as a chatas, you never did anything to it that was consistent with it being an ola. And so as a result, Rabbi Yoshua says that's why we can make the transformation. And now, of course, Rabbi Eliezer disagrees and says that transformation is not true. There is no transformation. It was an ola and it is an ola. And it's just now not a kosher ola. So that was the debate that we had. Now, the
Well,
problem.
once he cuts the that if he cut, let's say, the esophagus, and now he cuts the trachea, it cannot go back to. How could you even think it could be a chatat? At that point, it becomes an effectively ex post facto becomes an ola, right?
No, that's the problem. You're right that it would be consistent with Enola, but there are two things. First of all, there's the opinion that says that a chatas you can cut two. So that's one. But two is before you got to two, you did one. And one is consistent with a chatas. So the point is that you've done something that's consistent with the chatas before you did something that's consistent with an ola. So that's why it was a chatas, and now it's a non-kosher chatas. It's not something that we don't know what it is, and it becomes a chatas, which is true when you start with an ola, but you do everything to it like a chatas. But here you started with a chatas, and you began to act on it like something that would be kosher for a chatas, and then all of a sudden now you're trying to turn it into an ola. It's too late. It's been acted on like it's a chatas. So that's the very key important understanding of this machlokas between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, so now that we
I
have that,
understand that theoretically. It just seems that once he cuts the second, whether it's esophagus or
that's why it's not a kosher chatas. That's why
oh,
it's not
okay,
a
it's not a
kosher.
kosher. Okay, but it does not become an ola.
It does not become an ola because
Okay,
his initial actions were consistent with chatas and not with ola. And
okay,
so, unlike when you do it in the reverse direction,
right,
the
right,
the location of where you're doing the slaughtering and the amount of pipes that you cut are consistent only with chatas. And
right.
so as a result, now it can be a transformed. Again, only according to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer says, no, of course you can't transform it. The owner set it aside. There's nothing to be done any longer. So that's the debate that we have. But now the issue is that we saw yesterday that there is a Mishnah, the Mishnah in Kinim, Perek Gimel Mishnah Dalid, that seems to clearly not be like Rabbi Yoshua because in that Mishnah it said that if you set aside a bird as a chatas and a bird as an ola, and for two women, but you did not say who gets which bird, and both of them are obligated to bring both a chatas and an ola, and now both of them are brought, and they're both brought, and one is brought above and one is brought below. They're both considered invalid. Why? Because we have a suffix. Because the Kohen doesn't know which one he brought above and which one he brought below. And it's important. If you brought the chatas above, it's not kosher. And if you brought the ola below, it's not kosher. And so as a result, that's why none of them will count. But according to Rabbi Yoshua, whichever bird was brought below should be a valid chatas. Because if it was a chatas that was brought below, so then, really both of the birds are going to be good, but at least this bird is going to be good. And if the Ola was brought below, fine. The Ola is brought below, but everything was done to it like a chatas. And we just saw that Rabbi Yoshua says that if you take an Ola and you set aside as an Ola and you do everything to it like a chatas, it's valid. So no matter what, the bird that was brought below should be a chatas. And so as a result, we should consider it as if one of the bird that was brought as a chatas, will be sufficient for these two women. And so, as a result, the fact that we say that it doesn't satisfy any requirement, shows that this Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yoshua. Now, we said, and that's where we're going to pick up, V'chi Tema, its second word on the line, 3, 6, 9, 11 lines up from the bottom of Samach Zayin Amabet. And you want to say, okay, so maybe that Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yeshua. Tashma, that's not the umimatzas amrisachi. I mean, are you able to actually say this? Tashma, we have the last Mishnah in the Masechet, and as we mentioned yesterday, the only key element of this Mishnah is the very last words, although we will try to explain every aspect of this Mishnah, because the last words of the Mishnah referred to Rabbi Yoshua speaking about the topic generally. And so that's an indication that he is the author of all of these Mishnayos when we don't have a specific person mentioned. And so as a result, that shows that he agrees with this Mishnah. So that's the inconsistency. But first we're now going to learn effectively the last Mishnah in Maseches Kinim. So let's take a look. Ha'isha she'amra harei alai kain im eleid zachar. If a woman says that in addition to her being obligated for a chatas ola pair of birds, which the Torah obligates her, she says that she's going to make a vow that she's going to bring an additional pair, and that additional pair will have to be an ola a pair of olot because you can't volunteer to bring a chatas. So Yalda Zachar, if she actually has a baby boy, Mivia Shtei Kinim, she has to bring two pairs of birds. Achat lenidra, one for her neder. They'll both be olot, as we mentioned. V'achat lechovata, and one for her obligation. Nisanasan lekohen, when she gives them to the kohen, hakohen tzorich la'asotan shalosh lamala v'achat lamata. Well, then the kohen needs to do them in the proper way. Three of them are above because three of them are olot. The pair of olot plus one of the obligatory pair, and achat lamata, and one of them needs to be done below because one of them is a chatas. Lo asakein el asa shtayim lamala v'shtayim lamata v'lo nimla. If he didn't talk to her about it, and as a result he offers two above and two below, srika shetavi od preda achat v'tikrivena lamala. She's going to have to bring one more sacrifice and bring it above. Mimin echad. That is if she said she did everything without with all in one species, because then we know for sure the Kohen must have brought two of the relevant species above and two of the relevant species below. And so one of the relevant species, we know which species it is, needs to be replaced. The one that was below needs to be replaced with an ola. The chatas needs to be replaced with an ola because that's what she was obligated. But umishnei minim. But if she brought it from two different species, tavishnayim. Well, now she has to bring two sacrifices because the issue is if one and each pair is going to be its own species because every pair needs to be its own species. So the Kohen knows that. So he's going to offer one of the species as a chatas and ola, thinking it's going to be and he brings both of them essentially as chatas and ola, thinking that she's obligated twice. And so as a result, now though, the issue is that the first one is going towards her actual obligation. The second one is going towards her voluntary request. But he doesn't know what his order was. And so as a result, we're not sure which bird was going to be the ola that needs to be paired up with a new korban. We don't know whether it's the turtle dove species, and we don't know whether it's the young pigeon species. So as a result, she's going to need to bring two, one young pigeon and one turtle dove, both as olot. So Pirsha Nidra, if she not only had given two different species, but she specified in her vow what species it was, well, now we have a real problem because maybe the species that she specified as being the ola was the one that that the Kohen brought that first, and therefore none of the one that she had committed to bring was used for her voluntary sacrifices. They were all used for her obligatory sacrifices, and so as a result, she now needs to bring two of that bird. Of that species of bird. On the other hand, maybe, and now she doesn't remember which species she had vowed. And so as a result, on the other hand, maybe one of them is the one that she specified in her vow is the one that was offered second. And so as a result, one of them was brought correctly as an ola, and the other one was not. And so really she only needs to bring one. And so as a result, she needs to bring one of the bird type that the Kohen brought second, and two of the bird type that the Kohen brought first. So
what's an example of this?
No. So I was saying I got that wrong. My apologies. So if she's let's go through it again. My apologies. So Pirsha Nidra. So if she specified what bird she was bringing in her vow, Tzricha Lahavi Od Gimel Predin Mimin Echad, she's going to need to bring three additional birds if everything was done with the first species, meaning if it all was one species. Umishnei minin tavi arba. But if actually what she gave to the Kohen was two different species, well, now she's going to need to bring four. Okay, and so what's the situation? So if the first four birds were all of one type, either turtle doves or young pigeons. So we know that the singleton Ola that was brought was from that same species. So again, let's say again, the woman says that she's not only going to bring the obligatory baby offerings, she's going to bring an additional pair of Olo. And she specifies, let's say she specifies that she's going to bring turtle doves. And now she gives four turtle doves to the Kohen. Well, in that situation, there's really only one additional turtle dove that would be necessary. But she doesn't remember whether she said turtle doves or young pigeons. So, in addition to bringing the one additional turtle dove, if she did say turtle doves, she also needs to bring two young pigeons because maybe she said that her Olo were going to be young pigeons. Okay, so therefore she ends up with bringing three birds. But if, in fact, when she gave the four birds to the Kohen, she gave them in two different species, well, then the problem is that if the species she mentioned for her Olo was the one that the Kohen brought as her obligatory chatas and Ola, she now has not brought any of that bird. And so as a result, she needs to bring two young pigeons and two turtle doves. And so as a result, because we don't know. So as a result, she needs to bring four separate birds to cover both of those possibilities. And so that's the next possibility of the kind of mistake that she makes.
Do
Now,
we know if did she specify a certain type for the olot and a certain type for the chovot or not?
so
Or
we're assuming that with respect to the chovot, she has not spoken. So as a result, when we say that she specified her vow, the vow is about only the olot. So that's all we're talking about. We're saying just that she vowed with respect to the olot.
oh, but
Okay,
the
so
Kohen might have substitute one versus the other. He might have
the
switched
problem
them.
is that she didn't talk to the Cohen. The Cohen didn't talk to her, and as a result, she might the two of that species that she brought, thinking that they were going to be her olot. Maybe the Kohen brought them first. And as a
Uh-huh.
result, they weren't the olot, they weren't the voluntary vow olot, they were the obligatory pair of a chatas and an ola. And so as a result, they don't count at all
Uh-huh.
towards fulfilling her vow. And so that's why she's going to need to bring two new pairs, one of turtle doves and one of young pigeons. And so that's the next level of complication. Now we're going to add a further complication. Again, we're continuing to add further complications. And again, remember, none of this is directly relevant to our discussion because the key aspect of what we're trying to get to is the statement at the end that says that Rabbi Yoshua made, comment that Rabbi Yoshua made in order to show that we have an inconsistency between Rabbi Yoshua saying that it's a valid chatas when you have an ola that was processed as a chatas and the Mishnah here, where it seems like he says it doesn't count. So what? How are we going to explain that? But we can't get to that answer until we finish the question. So now the next Mishnah issue is kava nidra. She fixed in her neder. Now, what exactly does that mean? So Rashi explains that it means that she obligated herself to bring the olot with the ola of her obligatory sacrifice. Now, what happens if she doesn't? Well, you can't bring an obligatory sacrifice voluntarily. But what you can do is bring the ola of that obligatory sacrifice voluntarily. And so if ignoring everything else, if she were to say, I'm going to bring a voluntary pair of birds as olot, and with my obligatory offering, and then she brings her obligatory offering, goes home, and says, "Oh my gosh, I forgot what I did. I was supposed to bring two pairs, and I only brought one pair." She needs to go back to the Beis Hamikdash, and she needs to bring three birds, one olah that will sort of serve as the obligatory replacement olah, and then the two olot that she has committed to bring. So now, with that background, we can understand what the Mishnah is going to say in our case. Because
Let
again,
me
we're building on what happened before. She's going to be giving the four birds to the Kohen, and the Kohen isn't going to pay attention and is going to offer them in an inappropriate way, just as we've seen before, two above, two below, and so as a result, we don't know, and the problem is that we don't know whether. And again, she specified the species. We don't know whether maybe the species that she specified was brought first, and therefore no olot have been offered, and therefore she needs to do everything all over again. And so as
So
a result,
why would she bring three? Don't we? She has to bring them in pairs. Why wouldn't we obligate her to bring the second pair,
because
bring four? Or do we
it's
say
an
that the chatat counted?
because the chatat counted, and you can't bring, if we know that the chatat counted, you can't bring a replacement for that chatat. That's
Uh-huh.
exactly right. That's exactly right. So tzricha shetavi od chamesh pridin lamala mimin echad. Now, if everything was one species, so then she's going to need to bring five additional birds. Why five additional birds? Because of the following. So everything was one species. So we know that the Kohen brought two chataot and two olot. But and but she doesn't remember whether or not that was the correct species. Now, if that's the correct species, so then she's going to need to bring uh, if that was the so let's go through it on the screen, right? So um if she's going to bring need to bring so if she's going to bring, if it's all one species, so then she needs to bring one as a replacement for the obligatory ola, and that bird can be either species. And then she's going to need to bring two birds from each species because two birds are going to need to be from the young turtle doves, young pigeons, because maybe she said that she was going to bring young pigeons, and two are going to be from turtle doves because maybe she said she was going to bring turtle doves. And so as a result, and again, she needs to bring those korbanot with the ola that she's obligated, meaning effectively she's done nothing towards her voluntary vow. Because the what she's offered with the in the first four sacrifices was not the complete vow, and she's committed herself to offer the complete vow. And so as a result, the first sacrifice, the first ola, is going to be in place of her obligatory offering. And so that way, the new vow offerings are in fact being brought with the obligatory offering. And then she needs to bring two sets of birds, two sets of two birds, which is, one plus four is five, because she needs to make sure that she brings the correct type that she said, but she forgot. So, and if
So
in
what does she
fact
bring with the one Ola? Does it matter which species she
it
brings?
does not, well, yeah, it does not matter which species. It does not matter which species. So, um, and if on the other hand, if however, she's going to need, if the four additional birds were brought, if the four original birds were brought from two species, well, then the problem is that we no longer know which type of species the Kohen brought first. So one of them, remember that. So one again, as a reminder, the what you brought as a chatas. Oh, 1 second. So my apologies. I didn't. I said that it could be of either species. The ola that you bring, but I'm wrong. The ola that it needs to be brought is of the original species that the first four birds were brought, because it needs to match up with the chatas that was brought. Because remember, the chatas, we're not going to replace because we know that you fulfilled your chatas requirement. But now we need to bring the ola that goes with it. So it's as if you're bringing the obligatory sacrifices with the voluntary
Has
sacrifices.
to
But that
match. It has
what?
to
And it has
match.
to match. Exactly. So if the first four birds are all turtle doves, well, then it's very easy. We know that the actual chatas that was satisfied her requirement was a turtle dove. And so that olah can be a turtle dove. And then the other four need to be two turtle doves and two turtle doves and two young pigeons. And so as a result, that way you'll have whatever she said about her voluntary offering, she'll be sure to be bringing it with her obligatory offering. But the problem is that if now her original four birds offerings
Well, she
were
better
two,
speak to the Kohen the second time because if he messes this
she
up again, she's going to keep bringing birds until the end of time.
100%, 100%. Well, that's why the advice is just tell the Kohen what he's supposed to bring, but let him make all the decisions. Meaning, you give him the birds, you tell it's for me, and you say, I need three and three, and you don't specify which of the birds are which. And so that way, all of them will be kosher because the Kohen has the ability to determine whether it's which sacrifice it is by his actions. So you're 100% right that hopefully the Kohen will get it right. But now let's go back to the example where she brings four birds of two different species. So now the problem is that the Kohen doesn't remember which one he brought first, and so therefore he doesn't know whether the obligatory chatas was a turtle dove or a young pigeon. If it was a turtle dove, so then the new ola needs to that's going to replace that be in the place of the obligatory offering needs to be a turtle dove. And if it was a young pigeon, it needs to be a young pigeon. And so as a result, in the end, she's going to need to bring six birds, three turtle doves, and three young pigeons, because we don't know which one is going to be for the Ola, and then we don't know which ones are part of her obligatory the vow that she made that because she doesn't remember which bird she specified. So
But the
as a result,
chatat was a valid chatat, wasn't it? I mean, at the time he
absolutely
sacrificed, so now
the
he's
chatas was valid, but we
right.
just don't know which bird she brought because she brought two different kinds of birds, and the Kohen doesn't remember which one he offered first.
Was he allowed to make another chatat when he already sacrificed a valid chatat?
Yes, he wasn't supposed to, but that's what he did. He wasn't. You're absolutely right. He wasn't supposed to do that, but that's what he did. So
Wasn't he
this
supposed to do what? He wasn't supposed to sacrifice it because he
he
didn't know
wasn't
which
supposed to
one.
sacrifice it as a chatas. He was supposed to sacrifice it as an ola, right?
But
Because
it was
she
accepted on the mizbeach as a chata because it was a chatat. He brought it, but he didn't know which one.
correct. Well, no, the point is that he brought it as a chatas, but she wasn't obligated for two chataot. She was only obligated for one. So
Right. So he didn't bring two. He sacrificed as a chatat, right? So
well,
therefore it's
he sacrificed. He again. She brought four animals: two
right,
turtle doves, two young pigeons.
right,
She was obligated to bring a ola and a chatas and two olot.
right.
The problem is that the Kohen didn't just assume that each pair was a chatas ola pair, and therefore he didn't bring one chatas and three olot. He brought two chatas and two olot. And the problem is that we don't know which pair was which, and he doesn't remember which he did first, and she doesn't remember which kind of bird she said she was going to be obligated to bring as part of her that she was obligating herself to bring as part of her vow. And so
Okay,
as
but
a
on some
result,
level, she or he, they fulfilled the chata. It was
yes,
sacrifice. It
yes,
was brought. It was
100%.
brought,
The
and
chatas
and
was
and and,
fulfilled.
and the Kohen ate it, or let's say he ate it.
Correct, correct. The
So
chatas
what
was
right does he
totally
have to be?
fulfilled.
Isn't it like I want to say not exactly, but a bracha levatala,
Yeah, for
not
sure. On the
exact.
other one, absolutely, there was a bracha levatala on the other one. So, but the point is that the good chatas was valid. The issue is we don't know which species it was from. And so as a result, she now needs to bring a new Ola to match it. But we don't know which species it was from. So she needs to bring two Olo to match it. And in addition to those two Olo to match it, she needs to bring four Olo for her voluntary vow, because her voluntary vow, she doesn't remember whether she said young pigeons or turtle doves. And so she needs to bring two of each. Okay,
This seems
next level of
problematic for him
complication.
to bring a problematic to bring another chatat when that
No, she's
obligation is
not bringing
fulfilled.
another khatas. She's not bringing another khatas. I didn't say she's bringing another khatas. She's just bringing an ola to match the khatas. And the
Oh,
problem is we don't know which ola it was.
but there
So
was a case where he brought six, right? Wasn't there the
yes,
case where
that's what case that we're dealing right now is the
so
case
isn't
with six.
that so? What aren't we?
All of the birds are olot. All the new
Oh,
birds are
okay.
olot.
Oh, okay.
Two of the new birds are one of each type to try and pair up with the original khatas, because we don't know which one, what
Okay.
species the original khatas was. And the other four are to do the voluntary vow that she made, but she doesn't remember what species. So she needs to fulfill both species in order to make sure that she gets the vow completed.
Okay.
So Nisana san lekohen ve'enu yodas manisna. Now she gives two birds to the kohen, and she doesn't know what type she gave. Halakha kohen va'asa ve'enu yodea ma'asa. Now to make it worse, not only does she not know what she gave, and she gave two different pairs, but the kohen doesn't even know what he did, whether he did it above or below, etc. So Tsricha Arba Predin. Now she needs four different birds, Linidra for her neder, Ushtayim Lochovasa, V'chatas Achat. So she needs to bring two one one two birds of each type for her ola, and one of her chatas for her obligatory chatas, because maybe the chatas wasn't brought correctly. Now
Oh,
the reason that and then Ben Azai Omer Beis chataot. No, you need to bring eight because you don't know. So the reason that only one bird is chatas is because maybe the obligation was not yet fulfilled. So this chatas can be of either type, because whichever type it was, there's going to be an ola that was brought with it. But maybe the chatas was fulfilled. So the bottom line is that if the chatas was fulfilled, well then we need the ola of the other type. And if the chatas was not fulfilled, so then fine. So then we need a bird of both types to make sure to match it. And if the chatas was not fulfilled, well, then this will be the chatas, and it matches one of the birds. So that's the reason that the first opinion says that seven is sufficient. And Ben Azai says, no, you need eight. You need everything to come together because we don't know anything. And so as a result, he says that you actually need eight sacrifices altogether. And about this, all of this is in order for this line, Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Zeusha Amru, Kishehu Chai Kolo Echad, Ukishehu Mace Kolo Sheva. When it comes to an animal, it specifically this is talking about a ram, and Rashi goes through what the instruments are. I'll go through it quickly, but the idea is the following: that when you have a live ram, so it'll neigh, it'll whatever sound it makes, it will make that sound. It'll bray, whatever sound that a ram makes, but when a ram dies, now all of a sudden you have seven different kinds of sounds, because you can make from each of its horns, you can make trumpets. From each of its thighs, you can make flutes. From its skin, you can make a drum. From its stomach, you can make a lyre. From its intestines, you can make harps. So as a result, you have all of these different instruments that come from the one dead body. And so similarly, Rashi points this out, the woman could have originally given two obligatory birds and four olot, or maybe even two olot if she would just remember what she said. And now that she gave just four birds, she ends up having to give seven more or eight more. And so that's the idea, that Here she had the opportunity to give one pair of birds. And instead, she's going to be giving the pair after pair after pair after pair. You end up with so many different pairs of birds that she ends up having to give. So that's the principle. But the bottom line is that that's Rabbi Yoshua. And Rabbi Yeshua, therefore, must be the author not only of that statement, but is commenting about all of this, and therefore is really the author of all of the previous Mishnayot, and therefore the author of the Mishnah that seems to say that when you change an Ola to a Chatas, it doesn't do the job. So as a result, the Gemara answers, "Na Amar de Amar Rabbi Yoshua la apuka mide meila." When we say that it is going to be a valid chatas, it's a valid chatas so that there's no meila. Lemesak like lechova mi'amar, but does it actually satisfy the obligation? Meaning, it is just like when you do an ola, a regular ola, and with a large animal, and now you have in mind the Kohen has in mind the wrong sacrifice, but he does everything correctly with respect to the ola. So what did we say? We said that the ola satisfies, is a valid sacrifice, but it doesn't count towards the owner's obligation. And so if the owner made an obligation on himself to bring an ola, he's going to need to bring a new one. So similarly here, when Rabbi Yoshua says that it's a kosher chatas, it's not a kosher chatas to fulfill his obligation. It's just a kosher chatas so that the Kohen can eat it, and it's going to, and it gets, and all of the services are valid services, and everything's wonderful with respect to it. But it's not, and there's no meila with respect to it. But it does not mean that the Kohen, that the owner of that animal has satisfied a obligation to bring a chatas, because he didn't intend it as a chatas. He set it aside as an ola. And so as a result, it does not fulfill his obligatory obligations. Okay, so that brings us to the next Mishnah. Again, this Mishnah that we just went through is considered by some to be one of the most complicated Mishnayos in all of Sidrei Mishnah. But all right,
But
now we're ready
there's
to.
still Me'ila. There would
So there
still
is
be.
no Me'ila,
Oh,
but
there's
there
no
is
Me'ila.
also no satisfaction of the person's obligation.
Right,
And
no
so
Me'ila.
that's why in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua says no Me'ila. And in the Mishnah over there, it says it's not valid because it doesn't fulfill the obligation. And so it needs to be replaced. Okay. So, Kol HaPasulin Shemalko Malika San Psula. That if anybody who is who is puzzled to do Malika, does Malika, it's invalid, the sacrifice. Ve'enu Metamev Vesablia. But it is not considered a treifa. It does not cause tuma through the throat. Malak bismol. Similarly, if you did malika with the left hand, and since you're supposed to do obligations with your right hand, v'layla, or at night, and since you're supposed to do all the slaughtering during the daytime, shachat chulin bifnim, or you slaughter in the proper manner, meaning you'd use a knife, and you slaughter an unconsecrated animal inside the Beis Hamikdash, inside the courtyard, v'kadshim b'chutz, or you slaughter again with a knife outside the Beis Hamikdash. In all of those cases, einam etamos beveis hablia. It's not going to create tuma. It is not considered a nevela. On the other hand, malak basakin. But if you did what you thought was supposed to be malika, but you used a knife, meaning you cut from the backside of the throat, and you did that, malak chulin bifnim, or you did malika on an unconsecrated bird inside the Beis Hamikdash. Remember, the earlier case was a case of shchita chulin bifnim. Now you do a malika on it, the kachim b'chutz, or you do malika on a holy animal outside the Beis Hamikdash, or torin shelo higiyaz mano, or you give the sacrifice on a turtle dove where the time has not arrived, meaning that it's not yet mature, because the turtle doves need to be mature. Uvnei yonash avarz manan, or you do it on a pigeon where it's already has matured, and the maturity is basically a yellowing of the animal, at least in some parts, the yellowing of the neck for the takes the young pigeon out of the category of of being a young pigeon, and the turtle doves need to have, become sort of golden in their coloring in order for them to be considered mature enough. Shiyav Shagapa. So this is, you're doing the wrong kind of turtle dove and wrong kind of young pigeon, because you're not doing a young pigeon, you're doing an old pigeon. So Shiyav Shagapa, or its wing dried out. Shenismes Aina, its eye was blinded. Shenikta Ragla, its foot was cut off. In all of those cases, it was not kosher to begin with, and therefore mitame b'vesa. It's going to be tame. It's going to be considered a nevela. Zeklal. Here's the general rule: kol shepsul psulo bekodesh eno mitame b'vesa. Anything that was disqualified while it was already in the Kodesh, meaning before it got to the Kodesh, it was a valid sacrifice, but now it's in the Kodesh and it's become not valid. That is going to be something that is not a nevela. It does not create tuma via the throat. Lo hayapsulo b'kodesh mitama v'esabliya. If, on the other hand, it does not, when it gets to the holy, it's already problematic. Well, then it's going to be cause tuma. It's going to be a nevela. So Amarav's small v'layla a mitama v'esabliya, zar v'sakin mitama v'esabliya. So here we have Rav apparently disagreeing with our Mishnah. Now, disagreeing with the with the simplest read of our Mishnah, but we will see in a moment that you don't have to say that. So, if you have a non-Kohen or a knife, well, then that's going to make the animal in the vela. So, Maishna Smol de Islay Hakshera B'Yom Kippurim. Well, why is it that we're thinking that when you do it with the left or at night, it's going to be kosher? It's because there is some circumstance where we say that there is validity to doing something in that manner. Because when you do when the Kohen Gadol brings the fire pan and the incense into the Kodesh HaKodeshim with on Yom Kippur, he needs to use both hands. The fire pan is in the right, the cup, the spoon with all of the incense is in the left. He's going to deal with the whole thing inside the Kodesh HaKodeshim, and that is going to be a service that he's going to be doing with his left hand. And so as a result, since that there's some circumstance where the left is okay, we're going to say it doesn't make it a nevela. The Laila, and when it comes to nighttime, that when it comes to the limbs and the fats that you can put on the altar, that's going to be kosher at night. And so as a result, again, nighttime can be kosher for something. So now we're going to ask the question, well, what about a zar? Zar nami islay hachshera b'shchita. Why not say that a zar should also not create if a zar does malika, a non-Kohen does malika, it should also not create a nevela, and it should not cause tuma via the throat, because after all, a non-Kohen is allowed to do shchita generally. So let him do this shchita as well. No, shchita lava vodahi. Shchita is not considered a service, and therefore that's why it's not going to. That is not relevant for how we're going to treat Malika. Malika is considered a service. It needs to be done by a Kohen, and therefore it's going to be, if it's not done by a Kohen, it's going to, according to Rav, it's going to be a problem. And it's going to create a nevela and thereby create tuma. The low, 1 second, you're telling me that shchita is not actually a service? V'ha'amar Rabbi Zera shchitas para v'zar psula. When it comes to the para duma, we said, the Rabbi Zera says that if a non-Kohen does it, it's going to be puzzle. Umachvela Ravala, and Rav himself, who is talking in our statement right now, it's Rav himself who says Elazar v'chuka. That how do I know that it's not going to be that good? Because the parsha of Paraduma references Elazar directly, and it says Chuka Zot Chukat Torah. This is the statute of the Torah, and this is Bamidbar Parak Yutet Pasuk Bet and Pasuk Gimel. In Pasuk Bet it says Zot Chukat HaTorah, and in Pasuk Gimel it says Unasetem Osa El Elazar HaKohen. That again, you're doing it with Elazar HaKohen. And so that shows that it's got to be a Kohen who's doing the action, who's doing the sacrificing, who's doing the slaughtering. No, shiny para de kachi bedek habayasi. Nah, don't tell me that it's actually a service. Really, paraduma is different because it's just like sanctified items of upkeep for the Beis Hamikdash. That those have some level of sanctification, but it's a monetary sanctification, and therefore the service is not considered an avoda. The low called who. But one second, we could point out the following. Kache bedek abayis bo kahuna. When it comes to the upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, meaning namely a paraduma, you need a kohen. Kache bezbeach mi boy. Well then, and therefore, maybe you could use a different argument and say, listen, when it comes to the upkeep, you need a kohen. Doesn't that indicate that the slaughtering by the kohen is an avoda, and therefore, kachim is be'ach mi boy, and certainly slaughtering for things for the altar would be an avoda. So no, not necessarily, because Amar Rav Shisha braid the Rabidi. No, midi dahavi amaros b'negaim. I can tell you about the statement of regarding tsaras, because when it comes to tsaras, you need to have a kohen indicate whether or not it's tsaras, and without a kohen, you can't have tsaras. And that's clearly not a service. Ubaya kohen, kahuna, and yet nonetheless it requires a kohen. Okay, so you've proven that the fact that a kohen does the slaughtering for a paraduma does not mean that slaughtering is an avoda. But what about the following? The nelef mi bama. Let's learn it from a bama, because after all, and when it comes to a bama, the malika of a non-kohen in that case works, because the non-kohen who brings a bird on a bama when there isn't a Beis Hamikdash, is bringing a valid sacrifice. So, mi bama lo yalef. No, we don't derive anything about bringing karbanot in the Beit Hamikdash from a bama. Hello? We don't learn anything about bringing a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash from a bama? That's not true. But Tanya, minayin leyotze she'im Allah lo yered. How do I know that if a sacrifice left the courtyard and then was brought back into the courtyard and put on the altar? Now, once it left the courtyard, it's an invalid sacrifice and it is supposed to get burned. But if you brought it back and you put it on the altar, it does not come off the altar. The altar has the ability to sort of keep things, many things, not everything, on it if you put it up there. Sharei yotzi kasher b'mama. And the reason that we gave in this brisa for why it would be kosher is because, but when it comes to a bama, everything is considered outside. Everything is outside the courtyard, and yet it's kosher. So doesn't that show that we do learn from bama? No, not correct. Yes, we reference Bama, but the learning is not really from Bama. The learning is from Psukim. The Tana, what they're really saying, what they're really relying is Azot Toras Ha'ola Samachle. He's really relying on quote unquote, this is the law of the Ola. And the law of the Ola references certain things that add things that say that we're going to treat it like an Ola, even though it's puzzle. And we're going to say that keep it on the altar, and it excludes things. And one of the things that it adds is if you take it outside. So now we're at the disagreement of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Rav. So we have, and let's take a look. We'll look at that statement, and then we're going to try and prove whether Rabbi Yochanan or Rav is correct, and we will eventually prove that Rabbi Yochanan is correct, but that we will leave for tomorrow. So Rabbi Yochanan Amar Zar ein mitame abeis abliya. No, and and Sakin mitama abeis abliya. That when it comes to a malika, if it's done by a non-kohen, you know what? it does not create tuma. It is not considered a nevela. And when it comes to a sakin, a knife, matame abesa blia, it does create tuma when if you were to use a knife instead of doing malika with the person's thumb, meaning you cut it from the back of the neck. So that is the disagreement. Rabbi Yochanan says no nevela when a non-kohen does it. Rav says yes nevela and yes tuma when a non-kohen does it. And for the efforts by the Gemara to prove who's right and the eventual citation of evidence that Rabbi Yochanan is right, you'll have to stay tuned, God willing, for tomorrow's daf. So my apologies for not scrolling. Again, I had planned to get a little bit further, but we'll stop here.
We're not going into the discussion between Rav and Reb. What's the other one? And Rav and
Rabbi Yochanan?
Yochanan. We're not
Right,
going
right,
in.
Rabbi Yochanan. We're going to get to, there's no discussion between them, but the question is we're now going to try to bring three different efforts to prove that Rabbi Yochanan's correct. The first two are questions from our Mishnah, and in the end, we're going to conclude our Mishnah, even though an ordinary read of our Mishnah certainly makes it sound like Rabbi Yochanan. In the end, we're going to say, no, our Mishnah is not necessarily like Rabbi Yochanan, but then we're going to cite a brisa that directly supports Rabbi Yochanan, and so that is how we will conclude. And we'll pause there, and we'll look forward to that discussion, God willing, tomorrow. Wishing you
Where are we now? Tashma, is that cloud?
so we are up to
Yes,
we
Boston.
are up to yeah, we're up to Tnan. Tnan would be the proof. But we'll probably just go back to Rabbi Yochanan to give his position and so that we have the discussion of where things are.
Tanan is
It's one, two, three, five
mhm.
lines up from the narrow where the narrow lines get wide in the Gemara on Samachet Bet.
Tana Azot Torah Ola. No, I'm looking for that.
Little further down than that.
Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Is that Ein Metameh?
Exactly. But Rabbi Yochanan Amar is probably where it would make sense to start. So I'm probably going to just note that for the purposes. So the Rabbi Yochanan Amar is the first, is the eighth line from the bottom of the
Right.
daf, sixth to last line, and it's the beginning of the line.
Mhm. I'm not.
All
I'm
right.
curious about. I'm thinking about the beginning of the Mishnah, where it mentions that doing this with the left hand
Yep.
is problematic. I mean, it doesn't tell me, but it, did we learn that he's supposed to use the right hand?
Correct.
So I think about a person who's uh left-handed. He wears the tefillin on the left hand, and if right, so there are other situations. I mean, maybe the lulav too. So I'm thinking, why not permit the coin to use the left hand in this situation? If we insist that he has
Well,
to
if
use the
he's
right hand.
in fact a lefty, so that's an interesting discussion. But the bottom line seems to be that we do not say that. We say that the service in the Beis Hamikdash has to be uniform, and since most people are righties, and the right is associated with all good things, so as a result, we say that every Kohen needs to do things with the right hand. I'm not sure whether a lefty who does everything, who trains himself to do everything with the right hand would be kosher. I assume so, but that's a question beyond the scope of what we've covered so far.
Well, no, he would have to do it with the right hand. What?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. That's what I'm saying.
So if he trains himself, I mean,
The question is whether maybe a lefty, just by the fact that they're left-handed, automatically is some kind of soul. But I don't think so. But the
oh,
bottom line,
I don't think
yeah,
that. I mean, there
yeah.
are people that could, but I'm
No, no,
just
no. Again, we're talking about the service in the Beis
right,
Hamikdash. So that's completely different to the fact that they put their tefillin on the left hand. The fact that according to some, which way they rest for tachnun will differ, as you pointed out.
right,
Some people say that you should flip the lulav and esrog. Other people
right,
say, by the way,
exactly.
not to. But in any event, it seems clear that when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, we want a sense of uniformity. We don't want people doing things in a different way. All right. Have a wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning together. Have a great Shabbos.